Hey guys, so this is AP World History, Chapter 12, Cross-Cultural Exchanges on the Silk Roads. So today we're going to look at the Silk Roads and pretty much how they integrated both the Eastern and Western hemispheres together, and how it wasn't just about trade, but it was also about exactly what it says, cultural exchanges, cultural diffusion. So we're going to try to get this out in one whole video. So it might be a little longer than the others, but it'll also be just one video. So let's go ahead and get started. Okay, so the Silk Roads, these Silk Roads are really started by the larger empires of the classical era, which would be the Roman, the Han, and the Kushan um, for the classical era. And in the West, we see that the Silk Roads are dominated by the Mediterranean area and the Roman Empire, especially. And some of the goods that they would send out would be glassware, jewels, art, decorative items. Whereas in the East, it was more the Asian land, India, China, those are the ones that dominated the Silk Roads, and their exports included spices, fruits, and silks. So just so you see what we're talking about, this is a map of the Silk Roads, and it's important to note that there are both land and sea routes. Mainly land routes for the most part. Most people did a lot, but you can also tell that there's a lot of sea routes. You can also see that it stretches from China all the way into Europe, and part of the sea routes also are into the Mediterranean. So one thing that you have to note is that merchants were not going straight across. They were stopping at points, selling their goods, and then those goods would move on further to other points, and they would eventually, kind of make their way, goods would make their way into China, and vice versa. It worked the other way around. So don't think like this one person was traveling all the way across and was, sending their goods all the way across through one trip. It didn't happen that way. It happened pretty much at checkpoints, kind of, if you want to think of it like that. So your first discussion question, what kind of economic advantage did the Silk Roads create? So as I mentioned, there weren't just goods that were traded on the Silk Road. There was also the spread of religion, and this is seen through merchants, missionaries, and others who took advantage of the roads to spread their beliefs. You have to think of it in terms of business. If a merchant has a common ground to start off with in order to sell their goods, and that's religion, then they're going to use that common ground to make a profit. So merchants would also be a part of this spreading the religion. And of course, you're also going to see the missionaries. Just in case you don't know what a missionary is somebody who goes and spreads their religion, across different lands. So the first religion we're going to look at is Christianity, and it's primarily in the Mediterranean basin. And it really did use missionaries to help spread it. Some of the more prominent ones were Paul of Tarsus, who spread the word to the non-Jews or the Gentiles, and Gregory the Wonder Worker. And he was known for kind of performing miracles in a way, and so that's why he was known as the Wonder Worker. Other places that we'll see Christianity are in Southwest Asia, and here in Southwest Asia, they're going to have a very strict belief in Christianity, very devout, very ascetic lifestyle. So it differs a little bit from that of the Mediterranean. In addition to Christianity, you're also going to see Buddhism, and that's really spread through merchants, and you see it being spread in Iran, Central and Southeast Asia, and China. So it didn't spread really into the West, into the Mediterranean, as much as it spread the other way towards the East. Also, you have Hinduism. Again, this will be spread by the merchants and the mariners. And if you look on the map for India, they did a lot of maritime trade. So it makes sense, since it started in India, that it was going to spread through the mariners as well. And then we see it spread especially heavily into Southeast Asia, places like Vietnam and Cambodia. And it spread so much into those areas that it even affected their culture, and they began to use some of the Indian language, like the Rajas. Another religion that it talks about is Manichaeism. So Manichaeism is similar to that of Zoroastrianism, started by Mani, and it believed in the idea of dualism, the idea that there is a light and a dark. So in terms of the light and the light would be the spiritual side, that you're on the spiritual plane, spiritual level, whereas the dark would mean that you're more into the material world, the things around you, the physical. And a lot of people liked it because it provided a rationale and explanation of good versus evil. And this is bad. Material things are bad, whereas me coming closer to my spiritual life is good. Also, another thing with Manichaeism is that they had high ethical standards, and you could see this especially with a group called the Elders, and they practiced a very strict lifestyle, pretty much gave up all material things and depended on others to help them survive. So this is a spread of world religions. The purple here, or lavender, whatever, this is Christianity. So like we said, it's more into this Mediterranean area, more into the European area, and it spreads somewhat into Southwest Asia, parts of Persia. And then this kind of orange color one is Buddhism. And again, you can see how it spreads into China, parts of Asia over here. And then, of course, lastly, the red is Hinduism and heavily into Southeast Asia. So it's important that you understand the map and that when you see a map like this, you're going to know right away, okay, spread of world religions, and you should know the time period as well. So this brings us to the next question. Based on your knowledge, compare and contrast any two of the following religions: Christianity, Buddhism, Hinduism, and Manichaeism. Okay, while we have the spread of religion going on through these trade routes, through the Silk Roads, we also have the spread of epidemic disease. And the major epidemic diseases that you're going to see during this time period are going to be smallpox, measles, and the bubonic plague. And the bubonic plague will push further along than the other two in terms of having more of an impact and a negative impact, per se, on the societies that it reaches. So we see the Han and the Roman Han Dynasty and the Roman Empire being affected the most by the epidemic diseases. Pretty much, obviously, it's going to lead to population decline in both. For Han, you saw the population decline in 400 CE, whereas in the Romans, it starts in the 2nd century. And of course, you need to think of it economically. If there's less people who are alive, then that means there's less people who are going to buy your goods, and that's going to affect your economy. So trade is going to decline, and it's going to become more regional, meaning that people are not necessarily going to trade all the way across or get their goods all the way across. Instead, maybe it'll just stay in this area, just within the region. Okay, and that's what the plague does. It kind of makes things more regional. All right, so your third discussion question: in what ways did the network of trade routes called the Silk Roads make life during the classical era significantly different from life in the pre-classical era? So pretty much, how did it change? So now we're going to go ahead and look at China after the Han, because remember, the Han Dynasty will fall. And there's mainly three things that you need to keep in mind: these ideas of cultural change, epidemic disease, and the political problems that existed. Starting with cultural change, we're going to see that the Han or let me put it this way, at the end of the Han Dynasty, the Confucian tradition will lose credibility. And that's really because they depended on Confucianism to kind of hold the dynasties together. Pretty much the idea that if we practice social order, if we practice, these hierarchies and show respect and that kind of thing, then it will maintain itself. And when the Han Dynasty fell, it kind of threw all of that out the window. So it's going to lose its credibility because of that. And people will move towards Buddhism and Taoism more. Buddhism is going to be attracted by migrants already familiar with it from India. So the people who come in will already say, well, I already know Buddhism, so I'm going to continue to practice it. And Taoism becomes more of a religious than a philosophy, more religious than philosophical, meaning that people are going to practice it on a more ritual basis, you could say. In addition to the cultural change, nomads will come into China at the end of the Han Dynasty, and they'll migrate into China, and they won't change it, but more so they will assimilate. They'll take on Chinese names, they'll marry Chinese spouses, and instead of still being nomadic, they will settle down and they will practice agriculture. So just keep in mind those cultural changes, how Confucianism will lose that credibility, and Buddhism and Taoism will come into a more important factor for them. And then the nomads, how they begin to assimilate. In terms of epidemic disease, we've already kind of talked about that and how the population will decline. And then, of course, lastly, one of the big reasons for the Han Dynasty to fall and what we see after the Han is political problems that exist. Loss of ability to maintain order. So nobody can get control of a dynasty because the central government will dissolve. And you'll see generals will come in and kind of rule the area. And they do that because they have the armies, they have the manpower to impose their rule. In addition, you'll see factions within the ranks. Marriage alliances will develop and other marriage alliances will dissolve, which will create tensions as well. And of course, land holdings will be an issue as well. Some people will get more land holdings while others will be upset that they did not get any land holdings, which kind of would lead into the Yellow Turban Uprising. So that's pretty much what's going on with China during this time. You see kind of the external, internal problems that are existing. Moving on to the fall of the Roman Empire, in terms of internal decay, while Rome is falling, you have these people called the barracks emperors that try to take over the series of many years. It was about 26 generals, and pretty much all of them died violently except for one of them. One of them was said to have died through like natural causes. Diocletian, he will be one of the rulers that comes in and he sees how massive Rome is, and he knows that there has to be something done in order to maintain it still. And so what he comes up with is that he wants to divide Rome between the East and the West, and that the East would have a ruler and the West would have a ruler, and they'd kind of have a co-ruler. So then that would create technically four rulers. In the East, you would have Anatolia, Syria, Egypt, and Greece. That would make up one part of Rome. In the West, you would have Gaul. Gaul is France today, and you would have Spain, Britain, and North Africa. And so, like I said, they would pretty much have their ruler and their co-ruler, and that would create four official tetrarchs. And for a time when he did this, it did help to stabilize the economy. But then you saw these tetrarchs, you saw some of the rulers want to have more power. And this can be seen through Constantine. Constantine was the son of one of the co-rulers, Constantius, and he pretty much will take over, and he will move the capital of Rome to Constantinople. It will be a new capital for Rome. He will reunite Eastern and Western Rome for a time, but again, the problem will arise in terms of it just being too massive, too large of an empire to hold. And they will also, in addition to that vastness of the land, they'll face external threats as well. And those external threats will come in the form of nomadic invaders. So one, you also had intermittent hostilities with the Sassanids, but then you also had these Germanic invasions by the Visigoths who come from Scandinavia and Russia, and they will want to come into the empire and they'll kind of hold them off on the borders. And as they do that, they will adopt many of the Roman cultures. They will become a part of the army. They will have laws that are Roman. They will also adopt Christianity as well, and they will practice agriculture. The Huns, however, another external threat, that's a different story. You see Attila the Hun, a great warrior. He pretty much is just out to ravage the area. He's not out to assimilate or anything like that. So the Huns could be possible cousins of the Xiongnu. They threatened others, and they were kind of forced the people to move into the Roman boundary. So these Visigoths over here who are kind of living on the edge, because of the Huns, they get pushed into the Roman Empire, and then this creates another strain, another economic strain on the empire, because now they have to take care of more people. And the Huns, of course, they're going to just move around at will. They don't care. They're not looking for a place to stay. So it's important to note that Rome didn't entirely fall. In fact, the Byzantine on the east, that will survive. And just so you kind of get an idea of what happens, this is a good map of the invasions of the Roman Empire. So what will end up happening is all this area, this light-colored area, this will dissolve. Okay, this part of the Roman Empire will end, and it'll break up into a bunch of little kingdoms and monarchies and stuff like that. Whereas this side, the darker brown side, this side will survive, and it will become known as the Eastern Roman Empire, otherwise also known as the Byzantine Empire. And of course, you see Constantinople here as the capital. So just kind of, you're going to have to learn this map. Know that when you see all these invasions in this area, especially in the West, that is the Germanic invasions and pretty much the dissolution of the Roman Empire as you would know it in this era. And it will survive only on the East. All right, so Your discussion question here is, how did the nomadic peoples of Eurasia, like the Visigoths and the Huns, how did they impede and or contribute to the development of the Silk Roads? Okay, so the cultural changes in the Roman Empire, this is really has to do with Christianity for the most part. This will be the most important survivor of Rome. The Roman Empire, like I said, will dissolve and break apart on the west and maintain itself on the east. But the thing that is throughout both and east is Christianity. So it will become a legitimate religion, and it will be this legitimate because of Constantine. He'll convert to Christianity because he had this dream where he dreamt that he won a war because he had converted. And so, because of his dream, that's what happened. He will impose the Edict of Milan, and this will allow Christianity in Rome to be practiced openly, because before you had to do it in secret, and if they found out, then you were usually killed. But now, because of this edict, now it can be practiced openly. Next will come Theodosius, and he will make it the official religion of Rome. So that's why if you're Catholic, you're Roman Catholic, because of that adoption of the religion during the Roman Empire. So one of the more prominent people in Christianity is St. Augustine. He was the Bishop of Hippo in Africa. He also converted to Christianity because he said he made Christianity intellectually respectable against other philosophies and religions, meaning that he was able to defend and use Christianity to defend itself and to defend the practice and the doctrine of it. And he helped change the religion to a church. So he helped it become an institution. It wasn't just a religion that was practiced, but it was now an institution that, could survive way beyond its starting point. One of the important things we see is the New Testament. And under Roman turmoil, officials wanted to standardize the teachings. They said, you know what, we have over, so many teachings, and we need to figure out which ones are the most important. And so they had several debates over those teachings. And by the 4th century, they found 27 short writings that were recognized as authoritative, that, yes, we see maybe commonalities in these writings over and over again. This is what we're going to use to help create the New Testament. Also, because of this, they established the institutional church, where there is the hierarchy. You have the Pope and the patriarchs. The Pope was going to be a little bit more powerful than the patriarchs because he's going to claim to be a descendant of St. Peter. And because of this, he will become the spiritual leader of the Christian community. So kind of what we have today with Catholicism, that Pope is our spiritual leader. And then you have the bishops who will take care of the diocese. Again, similar to today, if you're Catholic, we have a bishop that takes care of all of El Paso diocese. And then also the bishops and the patriarchs would if disputes arose, they would be the official decision makers on any doctrinal issues. So the Council of Nicaea and Chalcedon, they will get together and discuss Jesus' nature. Was he completely human? Was he completely divine? Who is Jesus? And what they came to conclude in the Council of Nicaea and Chalcedon was that he was both. He was both human and divine. So that's where you get the idea of like the Holy Trinity, Father, Son, Holy Spirit. He's all of them. And Christianity will survive imperial authority and will serve as a cultural unification from many lands, meaning that it's going to be extremely important, especially in the Western empires when you see them develop later on, especially in the Middle Ages, and yet it will still be important in the Byzantine Empire as well. All right, so your last question. The textbook states Christianity was perhaps the most prominent survivor of the Western Roman Empire. What does this statement mean, and how did Christianity manage to survive and thrive after the collapse of the empire? Okay, so go ahead, finish up those discussion questions, and don't forget to turn them in on Friday.